Welcome, welcome, welcome to tonight's 14Karat Cabaret. Baltimore, Paris, and the gutter. Here we are, our rare and luxurious selves. Tonight is an evening organized by A.G. Shenker. Yay! This will be Andy's second and last show until May at the Current in the beautiful Garden Oasis. We were lucky enough to have Andy's show here, and away it goes, unless it rains. Because it may rain. So I'm glad everyone's here, looking forward to the show. Thank you, Andy, and voila, circles and lines.
So, thank you, Laura and the 14Karat Cabaret for hosting and being integral, really, to this nascent series. I mean, she's usually on the stage here, but tonight she's behind the bar, and hopefully will be rejoining us again I think it is May 5th at Current, and look forward to that if any of you are around. But tonight, very fortunate to be with you all here, a kind of home away from home, connecting perhaps to the thoughtful delirium of a lineage that welcomes the foreign as a friend, however incomprehensible, connecting more generally to the ethos and pathos of the creative community of Baltimore, which is to a perpetual student, which has for a perpetual student no shortage of examples to be moved by and considered. Often feel like this young girl in the following anecdote always comes back to coffee shops, and I would see this mother and daughter over the years, and at this point I think she was, the daughter was probably late elementary school. They had just come from a recital, and the mother asked the daughter, "Were you nervous?" And she's like, "No." And the mother was taken aback, and she was like, Why weren't you nervous?" And she said, "Well, the teacher was playing louder." And that's how I feel often, the permission of the great examples we're fortunate to have here. So thank you for being my teachers. So, circles and lines. At a turning point of history, dangerously rhyming, where so much, everything is on the line. So much about drawing lines. I'm reminded of Maurice Blanchot, who writes in the writing of the disaster, "The circle uncurled along a straight line, rigorously prolonged, reforms a circle eternally bereft of a center." There is something of this impossible experience glimpsed in pregnancy too, where the clear distinction between one and two becomes blurred, more fluid. Luce Rigori remarks elsewhere about the immeasurable impact of physicists coming to terms with fluid dynamics only after first beginning from solid. More concretely, I can't help but see through the reactionary forces arrayed against the current waves of gender fluidity something of our difficult and riddled exposure to the less certain traces and movements of a centerless circle, such that insomnia would be, according to Levinas, the vigilance of thinking. There is also a rush to ban books. It's not easy, it seems, to see ourselves. It's especially moving then to be in the company of so many various and talented writers here, and writers in the most general sense too. So the dictionary, I read the dictionary a lot. Once the most linear book, and also quite otherwise. One of the beautiful and perplexing infinities, language. The word ravel, for instance, means to unravel, means to separate the fibers or threads of cloth, for example. And line also means goes back to flax. But also, within this first definition, it also means to unravel, both to clarify through separation and simultaneously to complicate, entangle, and fray, particularly at the edges. In any case, I will leave you with one last word, arrange, which struck me a while ago and has stayed with me since. While meaning many things, including to make preparations, to plan, to agree about, settle, and even to reset music for other instruments or voices, or for another style of performance. It goes back, however, to a root meaning to put in a line or row, and this then goes back to a root meaning circle or ring. One more thing. The flyer posted for tonight was a drawing by Barry Nemett, who will be speaking next. And the title of that drawing is Unrepentant Jester. And it incorporates a poem by Richard Coulter, who was the philosopher in residence at MICA many, many years. He passed away in 2004, and we miss him greatly. And that poem that he incorporates in that drawing is titled Unrepentant Jester as well. He was a close friend of many, and I'd like to just read the end of that long poem for you here. Unrepentant Jester, an excerpt. The story is never told at all. No echoes of the starting or the stopping can be heard. These gentle fragments mask a secret tale with intriguing care. They pay honor amidst this flourished wit and contemplated prose to something far more hidden than the mind can simply tell. There's a tale waiting in the wings of every single soul to find its way into the human ageless stream. Now, just because you cannot ever tell that story clearly in the light of day does not prevent the yearning soul to try forevermore. Barry Nemett.
It was a pleasure to be reacquainted with Andy about a month ago at an opening, and I was just touched that he remembered me and came up to me and brought up this reading event. And it was, in fact, Richard Coulter who brought us together, the philosopher in residence. And I see Andy as following in Richard's huge footsteps, because Richard always brought people together, and Andy always did that too, as well as continuing to do that. And so when he brought up that he was curating this event, it felt right, and it really fed my soul to hear that he was still involved in the same kinds of gatherings. And I'm glad that Richard, that Andy read something of Richard's, because Richard always, for 20 years, he and I collaborated, and he wrote texts which I would incorporate into my paintings. And Jeff, just a little bit before the event started, he said he remembered me too. And he asked what I was going to do here, because I'm not going to paint. I was the chair of painting for 25 years at MICA. I taught there for 50 years. And since Richard passed away 19 years ago, I've been writing my own texts that I incorporate into my works, and the text that I'm going to read tonight, two texts. One of the first one is a short piece that I incorporated into a scroll drawing. The other thing that I'll say is that a certain word that comes up in my prose here, the word is cops. I wouldn't know it at all, except that a favorite Leonardo da Vinci work, it's actually one of my favorite all-time drawings, is called A Copse of Birches, and I incorporate that word in this work that I'll read you now. It's all of about 6 by 7 inches, and yet it looms huge in my imagination. Maybe one of the largest drawings that I've ever seen. Okay, so the first of the two writings is Celestial Stories. For us, Druid Ridge Cemetery was a duck pond, a playground, more about reading than grim reaping. A sprawling, surprisingly intimate landscape, it's a place where I still go to draw. When our children were small, they traced its graven granite and marble markers with their silky flesh. Across my palm, they finger-tipped tiny block letters, which became tall tales, promising I'd only eye Laney's and Adams' made-up stories through their touch and whispered hints. I gazed towards trees' little fingers, their sprig-topped cloud inscriptions writ huge. Ever since, I've felt letters, their mighty loft, their coziness, their abracadabras. A greening, grieving copper beach with a shadow our kids claimed was bigger than sky has become a stump. But some acorns from other trees then have grown full-blown roots and branches now, with trunks children climb and play hide and seek behind. Scrub became oaks, became groves, became forests, became a scroll. We strolled. Explosions colored fall tall tales, making them look taller. Ambers and yellows and more leafy last breaths, buried tree feet and crunched under ours. A sapling copse met an aged Copper Beach corpse, and half-mooned fingernails spelled out under earth unearthly constellations of soulful strangers, never-ranging young and old folk alike. Using the sculpted ABCs of gravestones as pages, I taught our children to read and write. Through Laney's and Adams' bigger-than-sky lives, they continue to teach me much more. That's it. I might have mentioned this before, but I'm a little bit out of practice in terms of public speaking because I've retired a couple of years from Micah. So I don't remember if I mentioned it, but the script that I just read, I have a very abbreviated part of that inscribed in the scroll drawing. This next reading is based on an experience while I was on a painting residency in France, where I first encountered the front of rain. The front of rain. Hardly a spit of difference between skies. Tough to tell that half the clouds were upside down and not real. A scent of just before rain whetted my senses as I walked along a lazy river in Leon. Slipping from nature's lull, I heard zizzy buzzing. Mosquitoes, flies, no, like everything else about the day, insects were on their best behavior. Then rain. Perfectly reflected pictures plunged into the skewered humor of funhouse mirrors. Trees with the roots on top squalled before drowning. Thunderous clouds turned brown, and a billion silver flicks hitting the river charged me. I could outrun them, I thought, fool that I am, but I stood my quickly squishy ground and got pummeled. I always thought rain was all middle. I knew it had a just before and after, but never knew it had a starting line till it charged. Awe, magic. In ancient times, someone would write a chapter or verse about the front of rain. Used to be, forests were fluent in many languages. Used to be, they spoke in tongues too. These days, trees don't talk. Sorcerers have become susurruses. The murmurs wind makes in rivers and leaves. Susurrus, yeah, someone named nature's whispers. The name sounds like what it means, susurrus. There's a name for that too, and petrichor refers to rain's fragrance, except while it's raining. Before and after defies, rain's scent. It takes time out of weather or the other way around. Unlike susurrus, petrichor doesn't have onomatopoeic street cred. Used to be, there were no street names. Used to be, there were no streets. Magic comes down to erasing lines to define this from that, which brings up a good reason to embrace a good downpour. It joins things, like Andy. Doesn't just make them wet. After the rain, stillness returned to Leon. Once again, flies and skies stared into and shared the lazy looking glass Ronce River. Mother Nature offered a sacred caress and beat her chest. A whisper and a scream, hardly a spit between. That's it.
I get tired. Hey, how's it going? Yeah, I'm kind of a short guy, so I'm just gonna read the first 500 pages of this science fiction novel I'm working on about a guy who lives in an apartment and he gets a job, or he has a job, and he uses the money from it to buy food that he has to put into his body to survive. It's annoying to me when a book has a strong, punchy opening sentence. It reads as false to me, although a sentence like this would probably make a pretty good opening line. I think I'll move this to the front of the book, even though I'm a few pages in writing it, and I'll leave all of this here too, so unfortunately it will have to be read twice. I never go anywhere anymore. Where is there to go? I go down the hall to make a snack. Or no, I'm already down the hall. I'm writing at the kitchen table, right next to the fridge. In an earlier draft, I was writing in the living room, but in this draft, it was too cold to write in the living room. Sure, I could have turned on the heat in that room, but the heat is expensive, and I'd rather spend my money on a good meal or a book, unless I get too cold, in which case I will turn on the heat and eat a good meal and buy a big book and run out of money, and it will be okay. I'll pick up a few extra shifts at the bookstore, and it'll be like I never spent any money at all. But I wanted a snack a moment ago, and I still do. I can see the fridge from where I sit. It's a black refrigerator. The brand is Hayer. It's covered in Christmas cards and love letters and notes from friends and doodles and old grocery lists and 2 or 3 self-portraits because I don't know how to draw anything other than myself. And even those are just caricatures. I wear glasses and I have a mustache, and anyone could draw an accurate picture of me. And there are envelopes containing old parking tickets and jury summonses and toll notices. There's a Polaroid of Marnie and me, and of course magnets holding everything up. A magnet from the vet who came to our apartment and euthanized our dying cat. It's a picture of a smiling dog and cat resting next to each other. And a magnet from a castle Marnie visited when she traveled to Scotland as a child. And a name tag from the clothing store where she worked the makeup counter. And a name tag of mine from when I worked at a pharmacy a few years ago. Inside the fridge is bread. And don't worry, I'm not going to describe everything in the fridge. Not right now, anyway. There will be time for that later. But for right now, it will be all right if you just imagine all that is in the fridge is a loaf of sliced wheat bread. What will probably happen in a few moments is I will stand up from the desk, but it's not a desk, it's the kitchen table, and go to the fridge and open it and pull out the loaf of bread and unwind the piece of wire that is wrapped around the plastic bag in which the loaf resides in its pre-sandwich form. And I will remove a slice of bread from the plastic and turn around, and as quick as I can, to be done with describing the process of toasting a slice of bread, I will pop it in the toaster and wait until it is golden brown, and I will watch it closely so that it doesn't burn and become like a piece of charcoal, because if it does, I will have to repeat the process and repeat my description of the process, when the truth is all I really want is a snack, a piece of toast. I haven't gotten up to make the toast yet. There are magnets on the fridge I didn't mention, magnets you will never know about. And by the time I get up from the desk, kitchen table, I will no longer want the toast, but I will still go through the motions of pulling the bread out of the fridge, removing the bread from the plastic bag, tossing it into the toaster, and waiting until it is golden brown, and then removing again from the toaster and putting it on a paper towel, because I won't waste a plate for a snack like toast. And then at this point, there are many possibilities. I could spread peanut butter over the toast, regular butter and some jam. But what kind of jam? I don't like orange marmalade. My father made me a peanut butter and orange marmalade sandwich when I was a boy, and after one bite I cried because I didn't like it, and he had only used orange marmalade because we had run out of strawberry and blackberry, and it was a long time ago, and I forgive him. It will probably be peanut butter for me. I don't think I have any jam in the fridge, and according to you, all I have in the fridge is the loaf of sliced wheat bread. When was the last time someone removed a piece of bread from somewhere? I'm not sure that that's ever happened. I find it difficult to describe the handling of bread. I'll leave it to someone else. It's annoying to me when a book has a strong, punchy opening sentence. It reads as false to me, although a sentence like this would probably make a pretty good opening line. I think I'll move this to the front of the book, even though I'm a few pages in writing it, and I'll leave all of this here too, so unfortunately it will have to be read twice. But aside from the new opening line, I figured I'd start off slow, take my time, write about my refrigerator, bore the reader enough so that they know what they're getting themselves into, which is a small book about a man who lives in an apartment, the snacks and meals he eats, the refrigerator, the hallway, the people he sees pass by his bay windows, the sounds he hears from the neighbors who live above and below him. He lives sandwiched between the third floor and the first floor in a row home. Maybe he will take a trip to the movie theater, maybe he will go to work. Even if it seems like the book takes place in one day, it is already too late for that. The pages that have been written over the course of a couple of days. What began in the warm kitchen has now moved down the hall to the cold living room. Yes, I carry the typewriter down the hall. I'll explain why later, but it's not a great story. And my pants are off now because I'm about to get in my pajamas, but they weren't off when I started writing a few days ago. If I'm not careful, I'm going to drop the typewriter, carrying it from one room to another. I'm back in the living room. It's George who keeps me moving back and forth from the living room to the kitchen, to the living room and back to the kitchen. He's my cat, the only one I have left. His sister Shosha died a few weeks ago, and now George is restless and sad. And when I type, he gets up on the desk or on the kitchen table and chews the paper right out of the machine. So I pick up the machine and lug it down or up the hall to a different room, and he follows right behind, and it begins again. It repeats. I want to start over and do a better job writing about the toast. Do a better job writing that scene. Make it a scene. It wasn't a scene when I first wrote it, but it was a few nights ago when I wanted the toast. And I no longer want toast. I drank 2 glasses of milk, I'm full, and my imagination won't let me go back to when I wanted the toast, only a few days ago, and I can't go back, or don't want to. I can talk about Marnie. She's not my wife, she's my girlfriend, but wife sounds better than girlfriend, just like mother or father works better than mom or dad in a book. I can't say why that is, but I know it to be true. I guess it's the informality of it, I guess. But the truth is I never call my father father because I actually happen to like the guy. And most people who refer to their fathers as father happen to not like the guy. Marnie is hundreds of miles away teaching short fiction at a small college in a small town. I won't see her for a few months, which is why I'm in the kitchen typing. For some reason, I can't do it when she's here. Whenever I tried to write a story, I had to wait until she had a doctor's appointment, or saw a movie, or had dinner with a friend. Then I snuck my way to the desk and wrote a page or two, and then she'd come home and I'd throw the page away and not think about writing until the next time she had a doctor's appointment, saw a movie, dinner, friend, whatever it may be. You get the idea. It got to be where I didn't think I was a writer, still don't, and came to realize that I was probably, I use that word too much, just another word I should use less often, and what a waste of a word, just. Meant to work a job somewhere and enjoy reading books and watching movies and making sure I never felt hungry, never felt a growl in my stomach or a scratch in my throat, until my luck ran out and I had a heart attack or found a lump, and saw a doctor and received the bad news and waited a few months or a year or two, and then I was gone and goodbye. Nothing to enjoy anymore, nothing to worry about enjoying, just nothing, just. But Marnie wants to have kids, so I'll have to get a better... I had to stop writing a few weeks ago. Might have been months, because the girls in the apartment below me said I was making too much noise. The typewriter was making too much noise. They didn't know it was a typewriter. They thought I was moving furniture, but they called me while I was in the middle of that last sentence and asked if I could keep it down. It was a weeknight and late for them. I was frozen on the phone. I didn't say much of anything. I certainly didn't tell them it was a typewriter they were hearing. I said yes, I'd been rearranging furniture in the apartment and lost track of time. I said I was sorry and wished them luck on their tests tomorrow and said goodnight. And it wasn't until later, when I'd calmed down and had a glass of milk, that I realized they had never mentioned anything about a test, only that it was late on a weeknight and that they had to be up early the next morning. But as I said, it's weeks or months later and I'm typing again. I'm writing, but all I can think about it are the girls downstairs. Can they hear me? Am I typing too loud? I'm unable to think about what I want to write, what I want to say. I can only think about whether or not I'm making too much noise. Thanks, guys.
Hi. Woo. I'm Rae Red. I use they, them pronouns. And I just want to give you like a little framework for the piece I'm going to do. I've been thinking a lot about the idea of home and connecting home and health. And if any of you, like me, have had housing instability in your life, you can really grasp that, of how when you don't have a sense of home, everything else kind of falls away. And I have become a very privileged, lucky human, and I bought a house 6 months ago. And I've just been grappling with this idea of finding this sense of like breathing out and having stability. And what else did I want to say about that? Yeah, and so this piece is kind of about that sense of home being the same as health and fostering that. And obviously we're in Baltimore, so depending on who you ask, 1,500 to 5,000 people are houseless every single day in the city, and there are at least 15,000 vacant homes in this city. So every houseless person could have at least 3 homes. So also thinking about how our scarcity, like houseless, the housing crisis in this city is actually very much fabricated by capitalism. All right, so that's a little frame for what I'm gonna do. We can turn this off. I'm gonna move it over there.
Deep in the heart of the city, there is a house. This is her show, a house show.
We are in the belly.
Marge was the first here. She was lurking by the bathroom sink when we arrived. Unfortunately, she doesn't know how to fix the crumbling walls. An endless rebuilding, house is shedding atoms and becoming new again. Becoming new all over, like skin and eye.
Like you.
Shedding, building, changing. having up top surgery in the same year that I moved into her. A body is a house, a castle is a house, is a secrets, poems in the walls. Read the poems.
Is this a poem? These poems fell out of my walls as I fixed them. They used newspaper as insulation. Read the poems. House Castle Poem 5. For many creatures to think of what's on the other side has been the subject that can't. It is too much, because they think a spirit raised could well imitate their executives and would avail themselves of the estate, and the men will get no congratulations. However, the fun is had.
Light bulb moment.
Light bulb moment.
We are all castle cowboys trying to wrangle in the lives that we want, that we deserve.
I've never understood deserving things.
I feel my skin prickle.
Why?
No one deserves a thing.
And deserves every last thing.
A butterfly landing on the kitten's nose.
How hard did you work for it?
How much nothing was done.
How many times did you fail?
There's so many more interesting questions.
Patch.
Band-aid.
Medical tape.
Visible mending.
Surgical mending.
Sewing. Incision.
I am visibly mended. Smooth wall. Fresh paint. Flat chest atop a belly. A new window through.
A belly.
A window. The day I moved in, I kissed the walls. I slept in all the rooms while fixing the others one at a time.
A bed-shaped trail dragged from room to room.
There were 3 holes to the sky.
One you could see from anywhere.
The other 2 you had to climb a ladder up to their height to peek through and see glue.
When the cold water stopped and I thought I needed to push a bubble out,
Veins in the house.
like I could feel all the junctions, veins,
Fluid.
like body, blood.
Veins.
I kept the fluid from my surgery trains, 2 jars of blood. A waterfall in the doorway the day Kiki moved in.
How many times will this house burst?
She simply picked up the ladder and put it aside to access the front door like it was the most ordinary thing. Body is home. Inheriting the past body's traces, no one person can ever grasp this house.
This old woman.
I wouldn't want her to be. Her heart is full of mine and others. The creaky spots in the floor.
The creepy spot.
The little nest I found in the ceiling that resembled the room below it.
Her nest of twigs.
My nest of wallpaper peels. how the front steps get slippery when wet.
To shape a planetary brain.
The dust of a plaster-filled room. A plaster mustache forms thick under my mask. The house, body, gender.
We will grow old together. We will grow old together. We will grow old together. We will grow old together.
into an ABC store? Raise your hand. Okay. My mama works in an ABC store. She was working at one today. Is that Mike cursed? Or maybe it could be possible that I don't even need it. Like, could I just cut it off, like, without bothering anybody? If I can cut it off? Oh, okay. So do I need to stand back here then? Like this? I don't want it to be hollering at me anymore. Okay. All right. Lord have mercy. Okay. My mama works at ABC store. For those who have never been in one, it's basically like in the state of North Carolina where you buy your alcohol. It's called an ABC store. They have one in every county. And so today at 6 o'clock, my mama finished her 100 millionth shift at the Northampton County ABC store, located in Conway, North Carolina. Anybody in here ever been to Conway? There's also a Conway, South Carolina. That's more popular because it's off of 95. Anybody been to Conway, South Carolina? Hell yeah, you drive through it. On 95, pretty sure. I didn't know I was gonna read tonight until like probably like 4 o'clock this afternoon. But here we are, and I'm excited to be here. I'm thankful to be here. I'm thankful that Andy asked, and it was so cool to hear everybody before. So yeah, my name is Ashleigh Brian Phillips, and this story is for my mama, and it's called You Go Into the ABC Store and the Sales Lady Says, "Now you listen, do you believe in ghosts? Because I'm gonna tell you right now, they exist. There's this one in my house, see, and I don't know what it's for. I hear it coming down the hall at night, creaking the floor, coming closer, closer, until it gets to my bedroom. I can feel it looking at me, standing at the end of my bed. It feels like forever, and I can't move. It comes and sits on my feet, so cold, so heavy, like it's trying to push me down through the floor under the house. And I stay there with the blanket over my head. I don't want to look at it. They say the devil comes for you when you're weak, and Lord, I know it. I know I'm angry, being left here so alone, all this hurting my heart, what's happened to me, and you know some of it. Everybody knows some of it. How my girls don't come home no more. It's easy to figure. It's hard for them now coming home to me. Their daddy in the nursing home, losing his mind, his memory. I tell them to come on home now. He might be able to still say their names. And everybody wants to know, ask me all the time, when's the last time I saw my husband? Like I just threw him in the home whenever he started getting too bad for me to take care of by myself. Like I'm just getting on and dancing on bars and having men over to my house. Let me tell you, yesterday I sat and rubbed his hand for 30 minutes 30 minutes before he looked at me. I was calling him baby like I always called him. I told him about our girls. I went on, and he didn't say nothing. He is a baby now. So afraid, you got to hold his hand and pull him out of bed, pull him to the table. He's not my husband. I don't know where my husband is. I want to believe he's the ghost that's been coming to me. If I could only pull back the covers and look, it might really be him trying to come see me, trying to pull me out of bed, twirl me on the floor, spinning like we used to dance by the river. We met in the summer. I was wearing a blue dress. He loved to tell that story. Could you look? Could you pull back the covers and look? Because what if it ain't him? My husband, he's a ghost, a spirit. He's off somewhere else fishing. He's a fish going upstream, laying under a fallen tree. He's a baby that's too big for me to hold. I want to cradle him with his clean hands. Yesterday, I watched him eat with his fingers. He dipped his roll in sweet tea. He never liked sweet tea before. Whoever he is, whatever he's becoming, he's got clean hands. You remember how dirty his hands always were. Always working, always grease and dirt way down beneath the fingernail. He fixed your carburetor, your cotton picker, your air conditioner. He built your girls a tree house. He barbecued a pig when your son got engaged. You remember that? He gutted all the fish and gave all the fish to all our neighbors. We all remember his hands. Do you feel sad now? See, I didn't mean to make you feel sad, but I gotta get it out of me somehow. I can feel it welling up inside when I just sit here and think. Nobody to talk to. I'm alone in my house, alone here. Preacher says I need to start writing, and I've been working on a poem. Here's how it starts. I want to share my life with you, just another day, but you're forgetting who I am as you fade away. See, you come in here and you ask me how I am, and here I am telling you. I'm telling you that sometimes I sit here at this counter and get so sad that I'm just staring, just like my husband, just nothing. I feel like I'm becoming nothing. I'm not his wife no more. I'm not his mama. My girls won't come home. I'm lost. And then that's when I hear her singing, Miss Ann Ruby. I can see her right behind you now. She's down in the ditch with a red pea coat. She's picking up trash. She's singing, what a friend we have in Jesus. Hear her? I can hear her right now, clear as day. All our sins and griefs to bear. What a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer. Seems like she's out there every other morning, as old as she is, cleaning out the ditch and talking to folks before they come in here. And yes, I've called her nephew to come and pick her up and take her to the house. And I've seen him come out here and try to get her in the car. And she fights him and screams at him. Folks think Miss Ann Ruby's crazy. But I'll tell you, she's live a ghost. still living with him now. She knows him better than any of us. See, when I was little, she lived by my school. She'd come in with that red peacoat, holding her guitar, and interrupt the teacher and ask us if we knew Jesus, that Jesus was our only friend, and the teacher would let her interrupt, talk for as long as she wanted. Miss Ann Ruby'd say, "Raise your hand if you love music." And we would all raise our hands. Then she'd say, "Raise your hands if you want to learn how to play it." And Cindy Liverman was the only one to keep her hand up. And Miss Ann Ruby walked to her in her desk and stood over her and told her that God was going to touch her that night. God was proud she was going to learn how to play his music with Miss Ann Ruby. And at the end of it, the teacher just said, "Thank you, Miss Ann Ruby." And Miss Ann Ruby went on to the next classroom and did the same thing all over again. And here's the other parts you might not know. Folks don't like to talk about it. For when she was a young mother, Miss Ann Ruby was a beautiful woman, a classically trained musician. Her husband tied her and their son up in their basement and shot himself in front of them, made them watch it. But she went on and raised her son to play the piano, the prettiest you ever heard. And then he killed himself too. And we all know what happened last year, but I'll tell it again. When them neighbor boys of hers, 13, 15 years old, came over to help her take the clothes off the line like they'd always done, knocked her in the head with a pipe and beat her to death, threw her in the boot of the car, poured gasoline all on the outside of it and lit it on fire. Miss Ann Ruby was in that car burning, but she pulled herself out. Oh, what peace we often forfeit. Oh, what needless pain we bear. All because we do not carry everything to God in prayer. Miss Ann Ruby was waiting for me outside one day. She looked me good in the face. I hadn't been that close to her since I was a real little girl. She said I looked familiar. She asked me where I was from. And then, before I could say anything, her face turned to look like an angel. And she said, "I remember you. I've known you all your life." And she's out there right now waiting for you. It's all right if you're lost. But no, you're not a stranger. Thank y'all.
I do have a problem with nature. We all do, kind of. I mean, sorry. I'm going to adjust this really quick. Yeah, speaking of problems with nature, this is a piece about doomed things. And it's from my book Tea Leaves, which comes out in September. This is my first time reading from it in Baltimore without like accompanying theatrics, which is kind of crazy. So if you were expecting some outfit reveals from me tonight, sorry you're at the wrong show, but this is called And Then Again to the Next. Famagusta, 1974, Common Era. I knew the city would fall when he stood on the veranda, staring out at the Mediterranean in the half-red of sunset, black and white striped trunks squeezing the meat of his lower back, his thighs. I tried to muster the enthusiasm I'd had for that form 2 years ago. Tried to resurrect the flutter in my stomach at that spray of hair between the shoulder blades, at the hard divide between his tan hamstrings and the pale smooth caramel of the skin above, shielded from the sun by that thin layer of bathing suit. What's the point of working in a tourist town, he'd purred once, stretched across the recliner on the veranda, when you can't let yourself be a tourist every now and again? I watched him standing by that same recliner now, his back tense, and I tried to conjure up those old feelings, but they wouldn't come, because no matter how irresistibly beautiful he was, he'd feel my eyes on him from the other side of the sliding door, turn, pad toward me across the tiled floor of the living room, and straddle me on the Merlot-colored couch, too eager, too earnest, too obviously anxious. I wasn't in the mood, and he'd be right, I wouldn't be in the mood, not because he wasn't desirable, not because I didn't want him, but because he was so sure that I didn't, so sure that he'd cease to be desirable to me, and I'd fail to perform, and then he'd be right, I wouldn't want him, not like that. And then he'd sulk, and the sky would go purple, and then black, and maybe he'd be there in the morning, but probably not. Maybe neither of us would. I'd lived enough lives to know when the tide had changed. I only ever met him in doomed cities. It was always the third year when I found it hardest to love him, somewhere between the waning of the second year's halo of bliss and the constant weighing of whether the differences were worth working through. Sometimes we made it through the third year, and sometimes the city would fall first, and sometimes we'd break up only to seek each other out, like contrite wanderers in the dark of the desert who realized they could not in fact give up on water, only for the world to end before we could patch things back together. In Famagusta that year, it was the airstrikes. Pompeii, 75, Common Era. He tossed his head back in my direction from halfway across the bustling Macellum, arm curled around the baskets of figs and onions at his hip. He waited for me to catch up to him before he acknowledged me. Later that night, feeding me one of those very figs, he'd tell me with a smug smile that he'd let me follow him for some time, just to see how long I would. I'd blink twice, stunned, and stammer out a denial. Truthfully, I hadn't known I'd been following until he pointed it out to me. That day, as we walked across the Macellum, Hercules' hill loomed through the distant haze. When I was just a boy, the demigod had indicated displeasure with our humble city by rattling the earth between his hands like a child angry with its toys, until columns collapsed and houses cracked, and mothers and brothers and cousins and fathers were dragged lifeless from the rubble. Last year, a single belch of smoke had risen from the mountaintop, accompanied by a hiccup of a tremor, like a warning. But the day I met my soon-to-be lover, as I took the basket from his hands and balanced it on my head, I imagined Hercules and all the gods smiling peacefully upon us from atop the heavenly hill. He caught the basket as it slid from my head, laughing. This was only the second life where I remember meeting him, so of course I had no idea what was to come. I thought I'd been given a second chance. Bob at draw 2353, before Common Era. When the fishing boat bobbed in from the Dead Sea that morning, when he set foot on the salty shore that glittered in the already burning sun, I knew what he had done. In the way his shuffling feet scuffed salt aside to reveal the sand beneath, in the way he stared down at his sandals to avoid my gaze, although I knew he saw me there, in the way that he emerged from the boat first, and then lion-haired Laban emerged last, behind the rest of the crew, as though I wouldn't see, wouldn't remember the two had been in close quarters together, surrounded by the smell of salt and working men all these weeks as they traveled from our end of the Dead Sea all the way to the River Jordan and back. In all these ways I knew he could hide nothing from me. In each lifetime I meet him. Some things about him are different, like his name, and some are unmistakable. This time a street magician, that time a museum docent, another time a fisherman, another time a carriage driver. This life his hair brown, tightly curled, that life his hair short, coppery, wisp thin, but always that flair for the dramatic, always that crooked smile, always that tendency to talk in his sleep, from full conversations with me he won't remember in the morning, to incoherent gibberish, to the muttering of the words I love you each time I slip from our bed, and again each time I return. Always our instant, irresistible draw, our accelerated intimacy, our sheepish admission that it feels like we've done this before, always my secret hurt that he can't remember how many times we already have, always his jealousy. That day at the shore of the Dead Sea, before the fire from the sky, before the glowing fair-haired strangers in the square, at whose feet I watched my lover throw himself in the desperate lust of a man deserted, before self-righteous Lot used that divine prescience to spirit only his own family away while leaving the rest of us to the flames. Before all that, I learned this for the last time. It is always the most jealous man, the most certain you'll cheat, who takes another's bed behind your back. In the next life I would see the signs early on, and I would know how to stop it, but in this life I threw him out of my house with a divine wrath of my own. Alexandria, 365, Common Era. He filled the hall with his music to the contentment of my honored guests, his long fingers flitting across the strings of the lyre, his delicate voice bouncing from marble wall to marble wall, glint in his eye, exultant grin tugging up the corners of his mouth. In my house he played with more confidence than I'd seen in him at any amphitheater, perhaps because of the secret knowledge that no matter how distinguished my guests, none were more distinguished than he. Yes, perhaps as penance for his past infidelity, and as reward for my patience, the fates decreed in this life that I was master of a house, and he my courtesan, a musician to whom I'd offered a higher bounty than his previous patron. Within my home, where I ran things as I pleased, he was much more than a courtesan, but he did have an exceptional gift for music in that lifetime, and largely because of him, my house had a reputation for its illustrious feasts. Of course, there were fewer and fewer feasts like mine, where the old gods were celebrated alongside the pleasures of the flesh, since Theodosius had unleashed his tidal wave of Christianity. With the rise of that religion, the empire as a whole had taken a downward turn, but we were all still a Christian empire in name only. That punitive new religion's strict sense of moral superiority would take years yet to gain any real foothold. We'd seen other gods rise to prominence, other rulers fall to decadence. Many of my friends still thought we'd outlive Christianity, and though I knew better, I had my parties, and I maintained my house as I pleased, and he shared my bed and commanded the household as though he too were its master. I had my own concubines, and to his surprise I allowed him his. It was part of my plan in that lifetime to see if taking away the possibility of infidelity would strengthen our bond, show him that while others could come and go, we would always come back to one another at the end of the day. In each life I tried something different. In this life, as was customary for someone of my stature, I had a veritable harem to choose from, and so I made no attempt to keep him for myself alone. It was only fair, but therein lay the problem between us in all our time in Alexandria. It was always what I allowed. Though I kept no slaves, everything we did together he accepted with the desperate gratitude of a plebeian toward the master with whom he'd found favor. He'd do anything I asked him to, but I was sure he did it more out of a sense of duty than the unconditional love I pined for. He loved me, make no mistake, but never as an equal. And so though we both had independence, and in that lifetime his jealousy was perhaps mitigated, it was largely because I believe he never felt he had any right to be jealous. It was awful. I came the closest I'd ever come to telling him of our past lives, of our intertwined futures, but afraid the spell would break and I'd lose the seemingly infinite opportunities I'd been given from God's knew where to get things just right, I cut myself short at the last possible moment. I was almost relieved when one of the servants interrupted our midday lovemaking to tell us, in a breathless panic, how the gods had pulled the sea out toward the horizon like a rug, leaving fishing boats alongside horrific sea creatures in the sand and slime. Ys, 434, Common Era. You want to know what your problem is? I said in the dark of the tavern as I helped him up from the puddle of beer and broken glass and blood, his blood and that of the 3 men he'd picked a fight with because they'd been looking at me funny. Even fairy-made cities of cedar and gold and crystal, walled off impossibly from the sea, had their bar fights. I groaned as I hefted him up, dazed as he was, so much dead weight. He was rather heavy in that lifetime, rather hairy, and his strength lent his usual theatricality a certain brutishness that grated on me while making me, in spite of myself, weak with lust. This wasn't the first time he'd stuck up for me when I wasn't sure I needed help. We made a strange pair in that life, he a burly blacksmith, I a waifish druid in a city where being a druid had begun to fall out of favor. It wasn't the kind of prejudice you might think. No, that was a simpler era where fairies consorted publicly with humankind, and 2 men could walk freely through the streets without fear of violence or harassment. It was my being a druid that made people cast wary glances at one another or move to another table if I sat too near, not my being with a man. Still, having a reason to protect me gave him a wonderful confidence in that lifetime. I think it was good for him. On his own 2 feet at last, he swayed briefly before plucking an abandoned goblet of mead from a nearby wooden table, taking a swig and belching. I continued, "Your problem is that you'll do anything to get my attention, but you've already got it. And your problem," he replied with a good-natured smile, mead sloshing from a new goblet as he gestured toward me, "is that you think you know me better than I know myself." I opened my mouth to protest, as was my habit with him, but the words wouldn't come. What could I say? I'd been his lover across life after life he'd apparently forgotten. Of course I knew him better than he knew himself, didn't I? The bell tolled in Ys for the last time, that same bell whose ghost people would hear on a calm day for years to come. He finished his drink. Osaka, 2083, Common Era. The elevator sunk 213 floors, and my stomach pitched in spite of its smoothness, its silence. Perhaps he was following, sinking down in an elevator 7 stories behind mine, praying he'd catch me before I drove away. Something told me he wasn't. We'd paid for the full hour of therapy. Surely he was getting the last 25 minutes worth of our money to process what had just happened. When I got home, I ran my hands under the chemically cooled water in the bathroom sink, splashing it on my sunburned face. I was having to replace the UV blocking resin on the windshield with greater and greater frequency in those days. I mumbled over and over into the mirror as I did. We would weather this. We always did. We would. Take every moment as it comes was one mantra I'd written on the bathroom mirror with the AR mapping only my contact lenses could pick up. Remember the mistakes of the past while leaving room for a future you can't imagine was another. And then, of course, the old proverb, fall 7 times, stand up 8. Mantras, the recommendation of my therapist. Ours. Ancestors only knew what he had mapped on the mirror that I'd never see. Ancestors. A funny set of spirits to believe in when you've lived 100 lives and remember them, but Shintoism had survived here when everything else had fallen prey to the cynicism of a world slowly dying, and perhaps there was something to be said about that.
How many of us were our own ancestors without even knowing it? I certainly couldn't have been my own. I tried to be with women a handful of times in past lives, and unsurprisingly, a baby had never taken. I'd been a woman a couple of times, but never been able to conceive. But I'd done it. I'd told him. Stupid, stupid, stupid. I'd told him. Why had I thought he'd believe me? By this stage of the Anthropocene, enough research had been conducted to create the vocabulary to talk about reincarnation, about past life regression, with some statistical certainty. I'd been flipping through a book about it in the white, round-edged waiting room of our therapist's office. I'd insinuated enough to our therapist about how I knew things about our relationship, our past, our future, that I'd been reasonably certain she knew what I'd been hinting at. So I blurted it during our session. They'd both blinked slowly, and she'd asked for clarification. I'd given it in painstaking detail, as if to children. I'd explained all our lives together with the confidence of someone who's had an accumulation of centuries to analyze what was happening to us. I ignored the slow widening of their eyes, jaws clenching and then slackening, brows furrowing and then unfurrowing. At the reactions, I simply thought I'd overwhelmed their one-lifetime minds with too much information, or perhaps they were experiencing their own awakenings. When I finished, he sank into his plush chair and stared at me blankly. Even lifetimes later, I can't forget the words spoken more to himself than to me. I should have gotten help for us sooner. I remember that day as the first in any lifetime that I had any doubt about the truth of my condition. I don't know what to say. I had to do something. It was our 5th year together in that life. Things between us were permafrost thin. The cool chemicals of the sink usually worked wonders on the swelling around the eyes, but not this time. Salty heat ran down my face, and I couldn't stop it, and I kept repeating, fall 7 times, stand up 8, but I tried to stand, really stand, once and for all. Stupid, I shouldn't have. There were some things no one could know, some secrets you carried to the grave, and then again to the next. When I heard the front door to our apartment whoosh open, then close, I shut the door behind me, but he came in anyway, something he'd never done in any lifetime, violate my privacy. And beyond the mantras written on the mirror, I spied his face, stony and unreadable. I thought that of a man who had decided his husband was crazy and would subdue him until he was taken away. He placed his hand tentatively on my shoulder, like a child reaching out to pet a capybara for the first time. They existed only in petting zoos by then, and said, if you know it's going to end up like, I never know exactly how anything's going to, please, just let me finish. If you know it's going to end up like this, something like this, why do you come back to it every time? I straightened from my slouch, pushing up from each corner of the sink, and turned to look at him directly, not through the mirror. Do you even have to ask? It wasn't as if I had a choice, as if I hadn't invested eons in our love, as if I could wake up in another life and see that crooked smile as I walked down the street and just keep walking. And then, afraid of the answer, I asked, wouldn't you? He looked down at the tiled floor for a murderously long amount of time before he closed the gap between us and said, I think I would. Something awakened in me at the uncertainty in his voice, and I kissed him desperately, needing him. It was the first time in months I'd been the one to initiate intimacy between us. All my lives I'd been so sure things were inevitable between us, so sure that even if I lost him, he'd be back again in another life and he wouldn't be able to resist me. The idea that we had a choice, that he had a choice, for the first time I was relieved of the burden of holding all the power. I won't say I realized just then what a complete ass I'd been, that I understood in that precise moment why he was so insecure. I'd been engaging with him in each life as if our relationship was doomed from the start, and I won't say it wasn't. Doomed, that is. The duration of that life can only be described, though I hate to use the term, as a slow burn. It wasn't the wool pulled from over the eyes, suddenly everything made sense sort of life I might have imagined. No, too much damage had already been done, too many gaps that no matter how well we thought we understood each other from that point on were too late to bridge, but we held on along with the other millions who had more important things to worry about than a revelation in couples therapy. We held on after the onslaught of hurricanes that forced the unyielding tungsten barricades to yield, after the unbreakable dams broke, after the sea came in with tsunamis of nuclear waste and oil and all the other poisons we poured into the sea. We even held on as the ocean claimed anyone brave enough to try to leave the safety of the skyscrapers while the rest of us simply starved. In past lives, I'd been eaten alive by the guilt that if I just said something sooner, if I just told him I knew we were destined to meet in a doomed city, we could have fled, but I'd been paralyzed by the fear he wouldn't believe me, or the fear that we'd leave the city only to be claimed by another disaster, that no matter what I did, it would always find us. In this life, at least, I was assuaged of the guilt. Even if I'd said something sooner, we both knew there was nowhere else in the world to go. San Francisco, 1906, Common Era. I wasn't rich enough for one of those earthquake cottages in Franklin Square, so at first I drifted west to Presidio, where I floated like a specter for weeks, searching for him amongst the tents, unnervingly crisp, arranged in neat rows by government agents. Then there were the Golden Gate Park shanties, which were rather rudimentary by comparison, rather dodgy, rather less safe, but at least the walls were made of wood, not canvas. He was nowhere to be found there either. Meanwhile, they pulled out body after body after body from the debris and the ashes. I scoured the papers until finally I saw his name among dozens of others. I didn't know what to do. It had been an exceptionally blissful 2 years in that lifetime, then a moderately rocky third, followed by a solid fourth, and before the earthquake hit, I was sure that finally we'd gotten it right. I wasn't hiding our reincarnated history from him anymore. In each lifetime, I'd promised after the last I would come clean as soon as I was sure he would listen. Hours after I found out he was dead, fingers of fog crept through the narrow margin beneath my door to my shack, and I hung myself from the low ceiling with what must have been 2 inches of space between my toes and the floor. I was eager to start over, to get this life over with and start the next one so I could see him. Well, wouldn't you know, the rope was too short and the chair I jumped from was too low to snap my neck, so for some time I flailed there, gasping and sputtering and choking, certain I'd made an awful mistake. As I jerked about, I heard the roof begin to creak, all tin and 2x4s. I wiggled my weight around all the more ardently, thinking, all right, if I make enough of a ruckus, perhaps the roof will collapse and I can forget I ever dreamed of this suicide nonsense and moved on with whatever crummy life I have left in California. And then it did. The roof collapsed, but that did nothing to help me forget about this suicide nonsense. Rather, I looked up in time to see a razor-sharp edge of tin rush toward me. Then nothing. Let me tell you, that was the last time I'd make that mistake. It took me 3 lonely lifetimes to see him again. Tragically long lives, uninterrupted by premature catastrophe. Famagusta, 1569, Common Era. A common misconception is that reincarnation happens linearly. You die 1 year, you are reborn in that same year. Not so. I have come to rest in 1 lifetime only to be reborn a millennium and a half earlier. When you've lived the lives I have, déjà vu chafes you like the ghost of an uninvited guest. There's something awful about realizing you've lived in a city before, at its end, living a stolen life in a place you know centuries later will meet its demise. Knowing its distant future, and therefore knowing the future of this life, if Famagusta is fated to fall 4 centuries from now, you won't meet him for the 4th life in a row. You come to understand this when you realize where you are and that you were born here before, in a future in which the city fell. And you're tired. Yes, tired in a way few could hope to understand the word. and then walking along the beach, nostalgic for a past you'll live hundreds of years later, a past where sweaty bodies lie prone in the sand to bake in the afternoon sun. You see a man kicking rocks at the edge of the sea, and he looks back, smiling his crooked smile, and you realize some cities are destined to fall more than once. Thank you.
Hey there. That was amazing. Thank you, Jake B. And thanks all the performers. And to Andrew for curating this thing, and to Laura for being here and getting us back in the cabaret. I have had so many formative experiences in this space. I think it was Donald Barthelme who said he was ambivalent about being called an experimental writer because experimental implied failure. And it is for that reason that I embrace that label. I haven't been writing much, but I wrote some things to engage with this theme of circles and lines. So I thought I'd share these little experiments. So the first one is, every word begins with the last letter of the word before it. That's all. Let telemetry, youth, hemisphere, evangelist trips, spindle, equivalents, enter rough, homonym, myopic creation, nestled down new with high herald deposits. Some tangle enters sopophoric crashes, steam mingled, derivative emphasis sister, regal lover roving giant, triangle, ephemera angel, limit to operate, even 9 elders, spun nuptial, latent, timber, rustic cream. So that's that little doodle. Thank you. Nice. And then this is just kind of like riffing on linearity. I was going to collaborate with Alicia before she got sick tonight, and I was like, what should we do? She was like, I'll do circularity, you do linearity. I was like, okay. So I wrote this. Simultaneity is probably spelled wrong. Repeating, folding in on itself. Then this happened, and that. We are at the beginning of spring, time as place, on a map of the universe. Trying to say bigger things is just widening the scope. There's more in the field of view. You want it to be true across time. That's a high bar. Expectations are risky. I want you to know what I mean at all times. Or if not, I want you to feel a hunger similar to the hunger I feel. The departure in that idea, are you with me? As if there are different hungers. As if all hungers are the same. Ideas unfolding in a sort of sequence. But the implication is they exist together and we're just unpacking them. Like we're all given the same kit to begin with, and here I'll stand here and unpack it for us. But we agree to focus on this together for a spell. Then we'll all leave and return to our own timelines. It sounds so certain. Certitude is delicious, like sequence, succession, cause, effect, that's one. Or A to B, a destination, leaving, arriving, leaving again, the sequence of events in between, incidental, incidents, things that happen, coincidence, coincidental, unrelated things that coincide, that happen at the same time or in the same place, or to the same person, or to related people in different places, or to unrelated people who coincidentally meet one another. 100 coincidences in sequence, in a line, the ongoingness. There is the experience of this, the escape from states that lies in this experience. The granularity that shelters one from the bigger cycles or the bigger ongoing stories. Make a list. Read one thing at a time until you are done, until it ends. The ends of poetry and its lines, line after line. A cascade of events suggests an end. How does it end? It sounds so certain. Certitude is delicious. Like sequence, succession, cause effect. That's one. That's a little thing. Now I'm going to go back in time 10 years. This book came out 10 years ago. It was my first book. It's called A Mountain City of Toad Splendor. And Adam Robinson put it out on Publishing Genius Press, which I'm still extremely proud of, being an author on Publishing Genius. And just a hot tip, he's about to put a book out by Baltimore's own Rupert Wondolowski, a new writing, so you're gonna wanna get on that. So I am going to once more engage with Andrew's theme and read a few things that have circles and lines in them from this book. And so yeah, I'm celebrating the anniversary of this book, and I'm roping you into that celebration without your consent. Okay. So three pieces here. This one's called Yelling Seance in a Crowded Theater. Dots gang up on lines in a tiny room. They go into a tiny room and then they do something outside the room. And they stop what they were doing and do something different until they're bigger than the entirety of whatever is outside the room. Then they relax, their dogs relax, their crabs relax, they become oysters and listen. Nearby, the Jell-O salad is a world unto itself, a complexity going unnoticed within this complexity until now, with the quiet oysters listening. Outside again, making something tall out of something wide, a narrow scaffolding viewed from afar where the laborers are getting agitated about it, taking turns being figure and ground, a groundswell of answers to questions no one asked yet, and a final wavering opening like a tunnel flying. Like they borrowed a picnic and made a brain out of it. Like showing what's going on in 5 different rooms of a house all at once, and suddenly what's going on is the same in all the rooms, and then the house turns into a huge mechanical buzzard and flies off. Quick lace everywhere. Ornamenting silence with a tasteful quick lace everywhere, so 100,000 souls can laugh in peace. Thank you. God, thanks. Okay, this is called Instructions. Should you ever find a feeling broken and dark, apply bleach to its 4 legs there at the grainy edge and hold under cold water for about a minute. If you let it dry in the window's natural light, a great glow will fill your heart like a pearly munchkin aura. Bleat out your trombone when you hear the skinny wailing from the back of the store. This will ward off any snakes in the area. But ultimately, when the need arises, there will be no stopping it. A tiny brightness will appear in the mirror, slowly rotating around itself, making a moat-like pattern that will mesmerize and fascinate you. It will be the most interesting thing you have ever seen, and you will not be able to look away. Then a sinewy substance will begin to form in the spaces between you and other water-bearing objects. You will feel proud and even secure, But then almost without realizing it, you will have become cut off from everything around you. And then you will hear her silky voice, the voice of the heart-eating siren, and she will tell you to bring me to her. Do not let this happen. Do not come to me at this point. It will be too late for you, and I am sorry for that, but leave me out of it. I will be long gone anyway, and I'm not telling you where. If it pretends to thank you, just go along with it. Under that ugliness lies a great sadness, and under that sadness, that's the best place for meat. Take those tremors that start in the second month of treatment and blend them into a smooth paste. Jam all your jitters into a secret wall box, what the old desert healers used to call a plum pot. Be on the radio. Then when everything seems quiet, call the authorities and demand a hearing. Prepare statements, hire representatives and expert witnesses. For so many days, all efforts will be directed at a single purpose. And when the day arrives, no one will show. It will be the most colossal blow-off of all time. A distant trumpet, the damp fog of dissipated purpose. A few of the guards will seem to be whispering behind your back. Have them fired. Bake muffins. Thanks. I always feel funny about this story because it involves a heterosexual relationship and I'm a homosexual. So I just wanted to put that out. Okay. It's called Full Circle. Part 1, the first day. It started on a day when I was left to my own devices, and I decided to go out walking. Along the road, I came to a stand of trees with a large, old, royal feeling about them. A boy was there, bouncing against the sky with thoughts like rocket launchers, all firepower, but stuck on the ground in the end. An acid rain began to fall on our fortunes, and since we were around the same height, our fortunes felt intertwined. My father had always said I'd meet a boy one day, and now here I was meeting one. But he had never said what would happen then, and I sort of hoped the boy would know what to do. People have been passing by here since there were people, he said. He had enormous ears and handsome features like a favorite friend of a brother, elapsed in your life over 20-odd years, and now abruptly pointing out historical features in your path. Later, you poured tea without the slightest haste. It was a perfect Sunday in a lifetime of Sundays. We took the route by the river until we came upon a cabin where we stayed. It was rough for about a week, but then personalities abated and time stretched out. It was the kind of place where a strange dog might rummage through your garbage, oblivious to your bright moments and your grim nights alike. There was no task at hand. We waited for emergencies and wondered about the world out there. We walked to the meadow on the hill to check out the different weather. We both heard a joke on the radio, and we decided this was important. So between the chores and meals, we began putting on jokes. We had limited material, but we made do. Part 2, autumn. It was the season when plants die, but we're expected to just go on living. My chair beat out rhythms only the trees could hear, like a salute to life in an entirely different scale. Cleansed of its greases, it's brittle and damp, a dark flower aped the moonlight, humming some unseemly tune. This is just about what it means to be alone, I thought. A clown, a song over there, etc. We climbed on and on up hills of dogs running circles around our morbid little fantasies. I stuffed his notes in my socks so I could forget but not lose them. He was the kind who brought you around making symbols of your eyes, so he could keep them. One night, an offering broke through its shell with great gusto, on fire with its tiny little speed. We broke out in daylight, a chorus of tonsils, but the sauce was thin. The idler's thoughts crept up the trunks of the trees. The night was otherwise unpopulated and damp, and I couldn't smell a thing. Part 3, circumstances. Each gate was the brink of something, waiting to be breached. Something personal made you stand there, made you turn away before diving, digging up something else. You would not tell me what it was. It's not as if we didn't have a terrible plan, but we were so busy trying to forget about it, we missed the entire day with its wind and sun, its people bumping up against each other. They all had terrible plans too, thank God. This was our plan. We had decided we would need some kind of prairie. We sold prairie necklaces at the mall. They were all brown and nobody wanted them. I kept my red beads in my pocket. I told myself they were ready for when the time came. It was windy but quiet otherwise, and the horses were still. I asked myself, why me? We had only begun raising the funds when they got their hands on the land. Out in open trenches, their machines tore at our hearts. Part 4, the last day. The day was a full-time demon. It braided the hairs on its belly. The sun had gone, thank God, replaced by the howling wind. He creased his ponderous papers ominously, their ink quietly fading. His memories were scorched by certain love possibilities, private rumors that had dissipated, waterlogged after days of longing. You weren't happy about our sordid fate. I could tell from the deep shadow of your cleft chin. But I knew I would always count those hours among my finest. There, without my mountains, my chime laid down on the gravelly dampness, and my snow, now decomposed, plastered on some flatness of worldness. She told herself she would break out of this eventually. Said if my sandhouse were pulled apart by indifferent forces, it would still show itself, blanched and frigid seeming under this cold sun. Not disappeared, not this here, not his. Finally, with those 2 chairs up against the sadness of life, my tender thoughts, as my father had called them, unmade me like an empty afternoon. The end.
All right. Not awkward at all. Thanks y'all so much for should have brought a beverage. Whatever you got. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Andy, for having me. Really glad to be here. I can quote a movie It's not a small thing that keeps me awake. I can go dancing, stay out late. It's not a small thing to relate. And song you laugh, awaken out from. Show me a good thing, then leave me alone. You're showing me heaven, then making me wait. It's not a small thing to relate. It's not a small thing to relate. Thanks, Phil. And how can I tell you that I'm putting it on? How can I tell you when I'm feeling wrong? Oh, if dreams came true, wouldn't it be nice if dreams came true? Then I'd have advice for you now. I'm knowing it, everybody has been so sick. Always thought I was a little little light. Oh, for now, you hear it coming in, but I try. We talk and something happens. You know me for a time. Call me common, can't imagine. You call me coddled, I'll reply. For now, for now, for now. Anyhow. Little forever, a little apart. You know how it ends. I don't know when it starts. A faded line. Thanks. Is it cool if I do one more? I don't know where we're. Yeah. Thanks. I'm Brendan, by the way. This project's called Lua. And the first song and this song I played are out there in the internet, swimming around. There's a hole in the sky I'd like to give it that one and only try. The time that I can't hide, the world that you thought was right. Hey now, baby, I wouldn't tell you a lie. Still there's something I'm saving. Come to me now. For a while, the way I want, the way I know it. For a while, and then go. Sorry, I'm nervous. Couldn't know what's right. The seconds turn slowly into night. Oh, the time when I can't hide. When all the world's inside. You know, baby, I wouldn't tell you a lie. Still there's something I'm saving. Come to me now. Come for now. I have no aim. I have no aim. I don't know anyone but you. I have no aim. I have no aim. I don't know anyone but you. Thanks again, Andy, Laure, 14Karat, everybody that performed. This was a really nice night. See you later.